Hello, this is Reverend Don Lewis coming to you from the beautiful metaverse, and more specifically from beautiful Danville, Illinois, homeland of the Corellian tradition and of Gaia Thrift, where I am today. And this is Midday with Reverend Don. Welcome. And as you know, if you follow Midday with Reverend Don, you can type your questions or comments into whatever platform you're watching on. They will show up here in our chat room, and we can talk directly. And today is the coldest day so far this winter. It is. I think when I looked last, it was 20 degrees outside, which is up from 15 when I came in this morning. So it's rather a cold day. You may hear the heater going behind me, but it's warm here in the shop. So if you're in the area, feel free to drop by and say hello after the broadcast. We'll be here all day. It's a lovely day. It is bright and sunny, if cold. And yeah, it looks like it's going to be a fairly cold winter this year. But, that's part of what winter is. And I was hoping to have a little bit more time to ease into winter, but no, it's already here. And but it's December, and this is really what one does expect. And I'm a great believer in not fretting about what can't be helped. And the weather is one of those things. It's winter; it's going to be cold, and so it is. Today, our stated subject is universal application. What do I mean by universal application? What I mean by universal application is that everything you learn in metaphysics, and I believe also in life, is applicable to everything else. Nothing is ever really segregated away from everything else. It always has an influence, it always should be used to shed additional light on everything else that you're doing. And, in my mind, this is a very obvious statement, but I realize that it isn't for a lot of people. Many times, and it seems to be very much the fashion of the last 10 years or so, I run into people in metaphysics who think that everything must be kept segregated in its own little corner and never touch any other system but itself. And it's as if they have cordoned off parts of their practice in very rigid ways, which makes no sense at all to me. The reason I decided to talk about this today is we were talking yesterday about Reverend Don's book of stones, metals, and crystals, which will be coming out very soon. It's in its very final rewrite. It's taken longer than expected because it's larger than was expected, because I found that the subject matter touched on so many more things than I initially thought it was going to, that I wanted to say about it. And we were talking yesterday about how potions and elixirs were one of the things that we talk about. And on one hand, you might say, what does that have to do really with the study of stones and metals and crystals? Except that obviously, if you are familiar with the practice, there are many ways of using stones in the creation of various elixirs and potions and so forth. And I thought that it was relevant to include. But it occurred to me, thinking about this, that, some people would have kept these ideas segregated. And that many people now are being led to think that way. And in my mind, it's exactly the opposite of what you should do. And I'll give you some examples of this. And one of them, which I've talked about in other contexts, when you look at the tarot, and many 20th century writings about the tarot, you'll find the correspondences between the tarot and the zodiac, the tarot and astrology in general, the tarot and stones, the tarot and any number of other things that are used to shed additional light on the ideas of tarot. And are these traditionally associated with tarot? No, they're not. They are the application of ideas from other streams of thought to expand your understanding of tarot. However, this is at this point also very traditional, even if it isn't a traditional part of tarot as such. And it's a completely reasonable thing to be doing. I certainly was studying all those things in that way when I was learning about tarot, and I think most people today probably do. And the idea that a particular tarot card might be associated with one or more zodiological signs doesn't seem at all odd to me. Or that it might be associated with any of various other things. The idea that numerology is very important in tarot should be obvious, in my opinion. Yes, numerology is its own separate study, but it's very, very relevant to tarot, and particularly because tarot cards are numbered, it's obviously very relevant. Other things, depending on, and we'll stay in the subject of tarot, depending on the tarot you're using, the symbolism of color may be very important in how you interpret some of those cards. If you're working with the Tarot of Hecate, I can tell you there are places where the colors were chosen for highly symbolic reasons, and because they fit in a certain patterning. And what do I mean by patterning? And I suppose this speaks very much to my thought on that subject of universal application. Patterning was a term used by the late First Elder Lady Bitterwind, particularly in description of artwork, but really of any subject, where you have taken many different levels of meaning and involved them all in it. So that you have, at one and the same time, you have the visual impact, the symbolic impact, you have perhaps a numerological impact, you have all kinds of different things that you've woven into what you're trying to say in many different ways. If you look at my books, you'll find that this is often true as well. If you go back and read them again and look between the lines, there are many things there which have been included in ways that are not immediately obvious. Because I don't believe that it's only what's immediately obvious to the conscious mind that gets through. One of the reasons I believe that artwork is a superior means of conveying information compared to prose, for example, is that it can function on so many levels, and the mind can take it in so many directions, both those that are intended by the creator of the artwork, and also sometimes ones they never thought of that may still be relevant to the subject. And, I remember this from years ago. I created an illustration for some purpose or another and showed it to Lady Bitterwind, and she proceeded to detail all of the symbolism in this piece of artwork, in which I had not intentionally put any symbolism at all. But it was all relevant to what could be said from it. And all of the things I have studied in my life, whether we're talking about numerology, astrology, tarot, stones, and hello to Mary in the chat room. It's good to see you, Mary. All of these different things, spell work, mythology, history, they all influence each other. And in my opinion, they should. And this is part of that idea of as above, so below, that everything in our world reflects the same basic inner truth and can be used to gain greater insight into any other thing. This is the basis of divination. This is why, metaphysically speaking, divination works. It is a method of communication for spirit using any number of different means, and anything can be used this way because everything is useful this way. So when we study metaphysics, and for that matter, in my opinion, when we study anything, everything we learn has application throughout our entire life, even when it isn't immediately obvious. And I'll give you another example of this, because examples are our friends. Let's say that you are multilingual and you speak several languages, which of course is redundant of me to say, but if you speak English but you also speak Spanish, the things that you know in speaking Spanish are going to influence how you speak English and vice versa. It just is going to happen. If you also speak Greek, the individual character of the Greek language will also affect how you think about other languages that you speak. Each language has its own character, its own idiosyncrasy, but they're not going to stay only in that field of study. They will come into your mind to understand other things. In the case of the German language, it's considered particularly good for technical matters because of the way it's constructed. In the English language, it's considered particularly good for describing virtually anything because it is so large and inclusive in its vocabulary. And I cannot imagine that if you speak English and speak other languages, that characteristic of inclusion isn't going to influence how you approach other languages. If you speak Greek, Greek language has among its characteristics that many words have multiple meanings that can all be in play at once, something that you don't find in some other languages. But if you're familiar with that from speaking Greek, you're going to apply it in other places. And these are just things that, in my opinion, you would naturally do. It's the same in metaphysics. It's the same in religion. It's the same in theology. If you know one thing from one place, the things you've learned from it, of course you're going to apply everywhere. This should be true in life in general. And hello to Swag Fan in the chat room. It's good to see you, Swag Fan. And we started today talking about the weather. And it's very cold right now. But in looking at that cold, I also apply things that I know from warm weather. So, for example, I know and have seen by walking up to them today that up by the windows in the store, it's quite warm because of the sun coming through the window. Never mind how cold it is outside, that sunlight is still warm. That will always be applicable. This is true, in my opinion, with everything we do and everything we know. And so I am vehemently opposed to that point of view, which says that you have to take all these different studies and keep them separate from each other, all of these different theologies and keep them separate from each other. I think that's very self-defeating and very limiting. Now, of course, you will do what seems right to you. And I do acknowledge that everyone is in a different place. And for some people, maybe it's important to keep these things separate for reasons that don't make sense to me, but may make sense to them. So I'm not condemning them for it. I'm just saying that in my mind, it is not the right thing to do. And Mary says, love the purple. Thank you, Mary. I love purple too. I recently acquired this purple sweater, and when I saw what the temperature was going to be today, I decided that it would be good to wear it today. But this too is, oh, and hello to Steve Taylor in the chat room. It's good to see you, Steve. This too is relevant. To me, the color purple has to do with spirituality. It has to do with spiritual messaging. It has to do with spiritual connection. It has to do with all of these high vibrational things. So when I wear purple, I expect to have some of that effect about me if I use purple in an artwork. That's part of the message that I am trying to convey there in many cases. Or sometimes it may be that I just think purple will look best there, but it will still carry this meaning whether I've intended it or not. Red is a color of energy, a color of activity, a color of passion, and it carries this message when you use it in an artwork or in an outfit, etc. And hello to Renee in the chat room. It's good to see you, Renee. And all of these things, when you use them, if you use them in decorating a room, if you use them in what you're wearing, they have their effect. It's not something that they leave at the door because you're using them in a different way. This is true also. If you look at how certain theologies are structured and function, it's not always only applicable to that theology. It can be applicable to wherever you apply it. And I think that particularly, we've been talking lately a lot about the Aquarian age and moving forward. And I think that we need to be very mindful of this at this time. Partly because what goes forward in that age is what we carry forward. And we need to carry everything that's valuable. We need to carry all of it. We need to value all of it. We need to use all of it, in my opinion. And so when I see those people trying to separate it all, I think that maybe that's the right thing for them, but it's not a place I wish to be. I think that, to me, metaphysics is the study of everything, learning about everything, and growing and discovering as much as you possibly can. And that's how I was trained and how I was taught, and that's what I will always pass on to you. And I would assume that people who follow my materials and my various offerings share this point of view with me, or they'll be turned off and leave relatively quickly. So, getting back to Rev Don's book of stones, metals, and crystals, there are things in there that you might not immediately expect to find there, because the use of stones and metals and crystals touches on so many other things. Now, I didn't begin to include everything I could have included, because it would be more than one book, but this is true. And we talked about this yesterday, how through many of the different books that I've written, the same ideas will come forward, applied in different ways. But that's because the same ideas are always relevant. And I am not a believer in any aspect of life in the idea that the peas must not touch the corn, or that the carrots must not be next to the potatoes. Now, I will grant you, occasionally, you don't want them to run into each other for one reason or another. But it's not because it's inherently wrong. And I'm a great believer in the idea that a mixed system is pretty much always going to be superior to an unmixed system. And I hold this also in terms of culture. I think that if you look back at history, those cultures that have been created by the combination of many different influences have done far better overall than those that were not. They have been richer, they have been broader, and they have been longer lasting and more adaptive. I think that people who are influenced by many different points of view, many different experiences, many different talents are going to be more adaptive, more enduring than if they were not. And I think that this is an important thing for us all to consider as we look at what we want to build in the future. One of the things, I talk frequently about things I see on Ed the Pagan's page. We talked about that the other day. He's talking a lot currently about the idea of a pagan town. And we could go into that in much greater depth than some other broadcasts. But when we think about that, what we'd want in a pagan community, and in this case, we're thinking not of some isolated little all pagan town, but more like a pagan neighborhood within an urban setting. My opinion is we want everything. We want all the good things. The more you have in your community, the more resources you have, the more ability you have, the more that you can adapt to whatever happens. Whereas the more isolated you are, the more vulnerable you are. But then this is a subject I come back to a lot, that isolation is vulnerability. I think that as we look forward to the future, we must be very mindful of this, that strength lies in numbers, strength lies in cooperation, strength lies in being able to stand together. And I believe it was Ben Franklin who said, either we hang together or we will most certainly hang separately. And I think that that is largely words to live by. Now, it's not always possible, but I think whenever possible, the more we can unite, insofar as possible, the happier we're going to be. The more resources we can gather at any given time, the happier we're going to be, the better off we're going to be in terms of what we can do and what we can offer to the world. So when we talk about something like a quote, pagan town, end quote, there are things that we would obviously want within that. We would want, I'm sure, temple space. We would want a metaphysical store. We would want psychic services, all of those things. But would we not also want grocery stores? Would we not also want perhaps an art supply center? Would we not want crafting supplies? Would we not also need builders, plumbers, electricians, all the things that we would normally need in our lives? We don't need them less because we're pagan. And I think one of the mistakes people make is they isolate themselves in this idea that they don't need all the things that they really do need. And then when they find they need them, they can't get to them. And so I think that as we look at our pagan community, we need to look at keeping it large and inclusive of all the different things we need. Which goes back to our subject today of universal application. No matter what it is in life that you're studying, that you love, that you're experiencing, what you learn there, you should apply everywhere in your life. Because there will always be some application. If you're a devoted stamp collector, I don't know if there are actually people who still collect stamps. It used to be a really big thing. But if you're a devoted stamp collector, there are things you're going to learn in collecting stamps that will have application to other aspects of your life, or could anyway. If you're an artist and you're doing that, the designs that you see will inspire you. The things you learn about the world will broaden your point of view. If you love cooking and you study different cuisines, of course, they're all going to influence your taste. You don't just turn one thing on and another thing off based on where you happen to be standing. Your entire life should always be in play. I'm a great believer in the idea of being a well-rounded person in this way, and I am very much in opposition to that idea that I see a lot now of isolating different components of life. I think it's a very bad idea. Um, Again, it may be that for certain people, that's where they are, and that's fine. But it's not what I'm going to teach, and it's not what I'm going to do. And I have found, I've studied many languages, and I find that every new thing I learn influences everything I already know, as well as my desire to learn more. I have studied history extensively. The more I learn about history, the more I understand about the present and the potential future. I have studied many different forms of metaphysics, many different skills, many different theologies as well. And I found that they all add to my understanding. And so my advice to you is to study everything you can study and apply it everywhere you can, and you will be better off for that. Now, as we're coming to the end of our half hour, let us take a moment. I want to hello to Black Crystal in the chat room. It's good to see you, Black Crystal. Let us take a moment for a word from our sponsors. Of course, I'm on my phone today, so this is going to take a moment longer than it might otherwise, but here we go.
Ready to unlock the secrets of the universe? Join me, Rev Don Lewis, for my metaphysical and magic auctions at Gaia Thrift at whatnot.com. Discover fascinating artifacts, mystical crystals, and rare and unusual books that could change your life. Don't miss this chance to bring a little magic into your world. Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions, where the extraordinary can become yours.
And thank you to our sponsors, Equinox Learning Hub and Rev Don's Metaphysical and Magic Auctions. I'm sure we'll be making an announcement about the next auction soon. And I hope that you're having a lovely day. I hope the rest of your day is wonderful. And I will be back tomorrow with our weekly roundup of stories. I have no idea what the stories are going to be, but there have been some interesting things this week, including the world continuing to go mad around us. And we'll talk about that tomorrow. But now, let us close with our prayer, as we always do. Divine Mother Goddess, Divine Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you for all that you do for us in our lives, and we ask you to help us to keep our minds open and to apply all the wonderful things that we learn in life to all the aspects of our life, to make our lives richer and more productive and bring us greater satisfaction. Help us to always see the best ways of doing things and to always keep our doors open. Beloved Mother Goddess, beloved Father God, beloved ancestors, we thank you with great love, and knowing you are always with us from respect, we thank you for your presence. And may you be blessed now and always. May you be blessed now and always, and I'll see you tomorrow.